Hello and welcome back. We are going to be back in Hebrews chapter 8 today. My name is Nathan House and I am with the Church of Christ in Houston, California. And again, if you can like or subscribe this, that would be of benefit to me. So please do that at the end of the video. So today we're back in Hebrews chapter 8. We kind of talked about it a few weeks ago. I was gone, so I haven't done a video for a couple of weeks, but we talked about a few things from Hebrews chapter 8 a couple of weeks ago. We looked at this idea of the shadow versus the true, the reality versus this shadow, this copy. The Hebrew writer uses this phrase quite a bit. Anyways, we also were wanting to talk about something else that we talked about previously. When we began the study of the book of Hebrews, we made note of the fact that the book of Hebrews is really highlighting Jesus Christ. It's elevating Jesus Christ. It's showing his superiority, that he is better, that he is greater. He's greater than angels. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than Abraham. Just like Melchizedek, this priest of Salem, he was greater than Abraham. So it's all these comparisons about Jesus Christ. The Hebrew writer is going to great lengths to show his superiority. And so here as we come into chapter 8, what is he highlighting here? Well, he's going to highlight two important things that are better. Two things that are more excellent, that are better things with Jesus Christ. He's continuing his discussion of the priesthood. So first of all, notice a couple of things that he says regarding the priesthood. So it goes back into chapter 7. You can go back and read that on your own. But he comes to chapter 8 and he just is very blunt, very forward. He says, now the point in what we are saying is this. Here's the point. We have such a high priest. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister. So a minister is someone who serves. This is someone serving as the role of a priest in the temple, in the tabernacle. Jesus serves as a minister in the holy places, not in the tent that Moses built, not in the tabernacle Moses built, not in the temple that Solomon built, but he serves as a minister, verse 2, in the holy places, in the true tent. And again, notice this contrast between true tent versus the copy or the shadow. He serves in the true tent that the Lord set up. We're not talking about a tent that Moses or Solomon built, a tabernacle or a temple. We're talking about Jesus serving in the true tent, the holy places, where he sits at the right, in the presence of the right hand of the one on the throne of the majesty in heaven. Verse 3. Now he again comes back to this comparison of Jesus versus other priests. And he's specifically talking about the role of high priest. Every high priest is appointed to offer gifts. Now later on in the book of Hebrews, we'll talk more about this idea of gifts being offered and what that means. But every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus, it is necessary for this priest, it's talking about Jesus Christ, right? We have a high priest, verse 1. It is necessary for this priest also to have something to offer. So what did Jesus Christ offer? What was his gift? Again, we'll talk more about that later. Verse 4. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. They serve a copy. Now, notice this word serve here, right? Notice this word serve. They serve a copy. They're not serving the real deal. They serve a copy. Jesus, he ministers in the holy place, in the presence of God. But these high priests on earth, they serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. Jesus is a greater high priest. Why? Because he serves in the very presence of God, not in a copy, not in a shadow. He serves in the true tent that the Lord himself set up. These high priests on earth, they serve a copy. They serve a shadow of the heavenly things. Now he talks about this. Look at this. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, again, here's a tent, here's a tent. One is the true tent, one is not. Moses built his tent. His tent was a copy, was a shadow of the true tent. When he built this, it says he was instructed by God, saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. So Moses was shown how to make the tabernacle. There was a pattern he was expected to follow. He was given by God, and there's a great little lesson in there for us as well. There are patterns in scriptures, and when God gives us a pattern, it's wise to follow that pattern, right? We'll talk about that another time. Verse 6, but as it is, as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry. See, Christ's ministry makes him a better high priest. He ministers in the holy place. Christ has obtained a ministry that is, look at this phrase, as much more excellent. And again, you also notice another similar word here. So here's the word, this phrase, much more excellent. Here's another phrase, better. See, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent. His ministry is so much greater, just as the covenant that he mediates. So now the Hebrew writer introduces a second thing that Christ has in this little short passage, a second thing that is better. First of all, Christ is better because he serves as a high priest. He is a greater high priest. But there's also something else better associated with Christ, a better covenant. You see, he serves a better covenant. It's better because why? Why is it a better covenant than the Mosaic covenant? Because this covenant is enacted on better promises. There's the promises that are given in this new covenant. And, Jesus Christ, when he talks about, his blood being shed, right, in Matthew chapter 26, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you. There's this new covenant that Christ spoke of. The Hebrew writer is speaking of a new covenant. He calls it a better covenant. This better covenant has better promises. Then in verse 7, he even alludes to the fact that the first covenant, the old covenant, there was problems with it. It was not without faults, right? For if that first covenant had been faultless, then there would have been no occasion to look for a second. But the first covenant was faulty. It did have problems. So there was a need for a better covenant, a second covenant. Then he talks about finding fault with the first covenant. He talks about how they didn't keep the covenant. He says, the days are coming when I will establish a new covenant. So a new covenant was going to be made. He talks about with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah. And again, I'll just remind you of passages like Romans chapter 2, verse 28 and 29. Romans chapter 9, just remind us that those who are children of Abraham by faith, they are, in fact, they are Jews, if you will. In Romans chapter 2, we'll just hop over there real quick. Romans chapter 2. And you can just real quickly look at verse 28 and 29. And it kind of goes back to this whole text in Hebrews, I believe. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. Watch verse 29. So who is a Jew in the mind of a Christian writer like Paul? But he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is that which is of the heart, by the Spirit. So circumcision is not this, this physical aspect. Yes, in the old covenant, there was a physical aspect to it. Of course there was. But in the new covenant, this new covenant is talking about something being done on your heart. Circumcision is not this physical act by the letter, but this circumcision is something that is inward. It is of the heart. It is by the Spirit. And so here in the book of Hebrews, let me go back to Hebrews there. Wrong passage. I'm sorry. Having a rough day today, I guess, with this. So here he says, again, back in Hebrews, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah. Well, again, I think he's using this phrase, house of Israel and house of Judah, in the same sense that Paul was in Romans 2, 28 and 29. So then he's going to make the comparison. It's not like the covenant that I made with them before. They didn't keep the covenant. This new covenant that I will make, he says, I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts. Does that sound similar to Romans chapter 2, verse 28 and 29? I will be their God. They shall be my people. And they're not going to have to teach everybody, hey, you got to know the Lord. Remember, in the old covenant, you were born into the covenant. You were born into Judaism. On day 8, if you were a male, you were circumcised. This was a demonstration in a physical way of the fact that you were a Jew. You were part of this covenant. But the new covenant was different. A new covenant was going to be that when someone put God's law in their minds, put God's law in their hearts, you wouldn't have to be told you need to know the Lord because you were already knowing the Lord. You already made this choice to know the Lord. You already put God in your heart. You already wrote him on your minds. You don't have to be taught to know him at this point because you've already made that decision. It says, They shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. Now watch this beautiful promise. Right back in chapter 8, verse 6, it says, the new covenant that he mediates is enacted on better promises. So look at this better promise in verse 12. I will be merciful to those who were in this new covenant that he was going to make, to those who have written his laws on their minds and in their hearts, to those who have made God their God, to those who know the Lord. And this is talking about this idea of a relationship. Look at what it says. Look at this promise. I'll be merciful toward their iniquities. I will remember their sins no more. You see, the covenant that the Hebrew writer is talking about that is greater. It has a better promise, a promise of forgiveness, a promise of a removal of sins. And then he has a closing verse. And speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. That old covenant is passing away. It's growing old. We're not bound by the 10 Commandments. We're not bound by the Mosaic Law and the 622 other laws that came with the old covenant. That doesn't mean that we're lawless. Of course, that's a class for another time. But look at this promise, this better promise. I will remember their sins no more. See, again, in Hebrews chapter 8, the Hebrew writer is demonstrating the superiority of Christ, the superiority of his ministry, the superiority of his service in the heavenly, the true temple as a high priest. So Jesus Christ is greater as a high priest. The covenant that Jesus Christ mediates is greater. It has better promises. It has a promise of forgiveness. It is a promise to those who are writing God in their minds and in their hearts and becoming children of God. There is this promise that I will be merciful toward their iniquities. A promise that he will remember our sins, your sins. He says, I will remember them no more. What a great promise. What a great blessing. Thank you so much for your time, and I pray that you guys have a great day. And remember that we have something great. We have something better. We have a high priest that serves in heaven on our behalf. We have a better covenant that has the greatest promise of forgiveness. Let's be encouraged by these things today. You guys have a great day. God bless.